Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Ambassador's Lounge next episode. My colleague Imran Yawar and Ambassador Tanvir Khaskheli, they interviewed Ambassador Zamir Akram about the American concerns and their sanctions on Pakistan's entities, claiming that those are in fact violating the nuclear norms and perhaps those are part of the proliferation network. This program, we intend to having Pakistan-India strategic, you call it parity or deterrence. We want to discuss that. The question is why Pakistan became nuclear. The world cannot blame Pakistan becoming nuclear. It was India which took the lead. It was India in 1974 which, in the name of quote-unquote peaceful nuclear explosion, they introduced the nuclear weapon politics in South Asia. But the irony is that India did the explosion in 1974 and sanctions were imposed on Pakistan. So these sanctions are nothing new for Pakistan. And then when Pakistan wanted that let's have a simultaneous signing of the NPT, India refused. When we wanted to declare South Asia as a nuclear weapons free zone, India refused. So in this background, when India wanted to give us assurances that their nuclear program was for peaceful purposes, had we believed the Indian assurances without building our capabilities, we would have been nowhere. So it is actually a tussle between the capability and the intention. If you have the capability, intentions can change any time. This is what India demonstrated in 1998 when it changed its intentions and declared itself as a nuclear weapon state. So therefore, had we believed the Indian assurances, so we would have been cutting a sorry figure. So we waited for 2 weeks how the world is going to react. And when there was a lukewarm reaction, so we had to go and nuclear. Otherwise, Pakistan had acquired this capability way back as early as 1985-86 when brass tacks took place. But Pakistan's common refrain was that we have acquired the capability, but a political decision has been made not to nuclearize our weapon program, not to weaponize our nuclear program. In this background, now today I would bother Ambassador Zamir Akram, who is an authority, who has been our ambassador in Geneva dealing with conference on disarmament for a long time. And he has been dealing with the negotiations on fissile material cutoff treaty, FMCT, for long. So I welcome, sir, again to this program. And I just wanted to pick up your brains about where does this conference on disarmament is today?
Well, ever since the Conference on Disarmament concluded negotiations on a comprehensive test ban treaty, which was in the early 90s or mid
95, 96, yes.
In the mid 90s.
Yeah.
It has not been able to start negotiations on any other issue. There are 7 or 8 items on the CD's agenda. 4 of them are supposed to be the so-called core issues. These include nuclear disarmament, prevention of an arms race in outer space, negative security assurances, and the issue of a fissile material cutoff treaty. There has been, as you know, and for the information of your viewers, it needs to be understood that the Conference on Disarmament operates on the basis of consensus. So, if any one member state, and there are 60 of them, if they do not agree on any issue, then there is no movement on that issue.
Correct.
So, you can say that every country who is a member of the CD has a veto. And so far, we have not been able, since the mid 1990s, we have not been able to agree in the Conference on Disarmament to negotiate any item on its agenda.
Correct.
So, as a result of which, the CD is considered to be deadlocked. And the most that member states have been able to achieve are discussions on various issues, but not negotiations. So, we can discuss things which are non-binding. Of course, negotiations are a different process. So, negotiations have not been possible, and to my mind, because of various factors in a very complex world today, with multipolarity and confrontation between the major powers, it is unlikely that there will be any consensus on any issue, and negotiations will continue to be stymied, and the stalemate will continue.
Ladies and gentlemen, my batchmate and very dear friend, Ambassador Amir Sher, he is also in the panel, and he has many questions about this emerging scenario between Pakistan and India as far as strategic world is concerned. Amjad, to you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, as Ambassador Durrani has mentioned that since 1974, when India conducted its first nuclear test, that pulled Pakistan into this competition with India, and it was 1984-85 that Pakistan was capable of developing its nuclear balance with India. But in 1998 was the era that formally brought Pakistan into this competition with India to balance its defense capability against India. That was the time when the Cold War era had ended, and this deterrence, the theory of this deterrence acquired eminence during the Cold War between the former Soviet Union and the United States of America. Now, how far in case of Pakistan and India, this deterrence theory of deterrence has worked, and is it working still now, or is Pakistan capable of deterring India?
Okay, so it's an interesting question. First of all, deterrence is much older than the Cold War. Deterrence has operated even in the Stone Age, because if there were two opposing sides, they needed the capability to deter each other by being stronger than the other, or being as strong as the other. So this goes back in the beginning of time, ever since human beings have been in some kind of human society, and they have clashed over different issues. The Cold War witnessed deterrence being taken to the most dangerous level in history because of the advent of nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver these nuclear weapons over thousands of miles through missiles. So the Cold War era was the era where we talk about nuclear deterrence. And nuclear deterrence, because it is since nuclear weapons also considered as ultimate weapons, or the ultimate destructive weapon of mass destruction, heightens the costs of any kind of miscalculation or any kind of misinterpretation on one side or the other, especially if both sides have nuclear weapons. Now, as you know, in the beginning, when nuclear weapons and nuclear technology was just being developed towards the end of the Second World War, the United States is the only country in history that used nuclear weapons against Japan. And it did so because the Japanese did not have nuclear weapons. It's a big moot question if the US would have used these weapons if Japan had nuclear weapons. In any event, the lessons drawn from that incident, particularly by the opponents of the United States, that is the Soviet Union and China in particular, was that in order for them to be able to protect their national interests against the United States, they too must have nuclear weapons and their ability to deliver those weapons over long distances. And that's where nuclear deterrence theory has come into being, and you can have deterrence by compellence, deterrence by punishment, various kinds of things. We don't have the time to discuss every aspect of what nuclear deterrence is, but essentially what it boils down to is that one side or both sides need to have the ability to absorb a first nuclear strike from its opponent and still retain enough nuclear weapons of their own to be able to deliver a response that can cause unacceptable level of damage to the initial aggressor. So this involves what we call in deterrence a second strike, a credible second strike capability. Now, in order for that to happen, deterrence essentially is in the mind of the opponent. If the opponent believes that the other side has the capability and will use that capability, then deterrence will prevail. So, there is again in deterrence, in the literature, there is the reference to this rather unfortunate expression of the rationale of irrationality. So, if your opponent sees you as being an irrational country or an irrational actor, your ability to exercise deterrence is increased because the credibility is increased that you will use your nuclear weapon. Okay? So this is basically the theoretical part of it. Now, the question is, does it exist between India and Pakistan? I think that one of the reasons for the outbreak of wars, and in particular the reason for the Indians to manipulate and take advantage of our domestic crisis in East Pakistan in 1970-71 by invading East Pakistan in December of 1971 was because our deterrence was weak. In those days, our deterrence was based on conventional weapons. The Indians had a major advantage in terms of conventional weapons over Pakistan, more than 3 to 1 advantage or even more. So when deterrence between India and Pakistan was based on conventional weapons, it kept failing and we ended up with wars, conflicts. But in 1974, as we have discussed, India conducted its first nuclear test that spurred Pakistan to pursue its own program. By 1984, we had achieved the capability to make nuclear weapons, although we didn't test them. And this we conveyed to the Indians during the brass tacks exercises when the Indians were conducting those massive military exercises on our borders, and we were concerned that this could be a cover to launch an attack against Pakistan. So if you remember, in those days General Ziaul Haq met with Rajiv Gandhi and basically conveyed a message to him that we have the nuclear weapons. As you do, we also have nuclear weapons. And if you threaten the survival and existence of Pakistan, if you launch an offensive against Pakistan, we will not hesitate to use our nuclear weapons. And then Mr. Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, called off the brass tacks exercises and the situation normalized, the tensions reduced. This was the first example of 1987. This happened in 1987. This was the first example of virtual nuclear deterrence coming into operation between India and Pakistan. And if you go back and look at the history, Pakistan and India have never fought a war after that.
But sir, I think India had in fact disturbed this deterrence in 2019 in Balakot.
Asif, the thing,
and they introduced the so-called new normal as far as conventional warfare is concerned, and then they did not realize that how it can play out.
I would rephrase that by saying that they tried to create a new normal. They tried to by attacking across the border, the international border. Although the destruction that took place there was no destruction, it was just some trees that were destroyed. But they did cross the international border. However, Pakistan's response the next day, which we called as quid pro quo plus, was sufficient to convince the Indians that going up the escalatory ladder would be detrimental to their own interest.
But India took the lead.
Of course it took the lead. It has wanted to show that it can do this. It was trying to call our bluff, and then we responded to that bluff by carrying out our own. So if you go up the escalatory ladder, this is one thing that we have to be very clear about, and I think your viewers need to be clear about this. There is a escalation ladder that you have to go up. Even nuclear armed countries will go up the escalation ladder, because it is all commensurate to the scale of the issue or the scale of the threat. Now in this case, the Indians destroyed a few trees on the Pakistani side.
And a crow.
And a crow. Now if that in response to that, if we had bombed Bombay with nuclear weapons, that would be overkill, right?
Correct.
It's overkill. You don't need to do that. What you needed to do was to show that we can respond to you in a conventional way, and we did that. Now had the Indians taken this a step up the escalatory ladder, then of course at some point on the escalation ladder, nuclear weapons would have come into play. But the fact of the matter is that the real essence of possessing nuclear weapons is not to fight a nuclear war, but to prevent war, any kind of war.
Correct. But as you said earlier, the United States actually used the nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And they have not regretted yet. And unfortunately, as per the NPT, nuclear weapons are not illegal, because it is a preserve of 5 nuclear powers. India, Pakistan and Israel may not be accepted or recognized as a nuclear weapon state officially, but The issue is that in this day and age, if United States could use the nuclear weapons while the Second World War was at its fag end and the so-called Axis powers were about to surrender, they were defeated, and they use the nuclear weapons. Here, I think a dispensation ruling in India, which is RSS led, and which believes in Hindutva and which is actually believes in anti-Muslim rhetoric mostly. Don't you think that they can go for this misadventure and to disturb the deterrence?
At the heart of all this issue is survival, and the Hindutva people, no matter how extremist they may be, fanatical extremists, whatever they may be, they don't want to die. they don't want to commit suicide. Okay? And they know that if they were to threaten Pakistan's existence, threaten Pakistan's survival as a country, that's what's going to happen to them. Now, in the case of the Americans, as I said right in the beginning, the Americans used their nuclear weapon because there was no danger of the Japanese responding with nuclear weapons. The Japanese did not have the nuclear weapons, you see. So, and then it's also right when you say, and it was a criminal thing, in my view, because we know, and the Americans also knew that the Japanese were going to surrender. So there was no real strategic reason for bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Correct.
I think the real reason that the Americans had was to test and see if their nuclear weapons work.
Correct.
And what is the impact of those nuclear weapons?
Amjad?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Sir, Pakistan's nuclear policy, it has got two main aspects. One is that first to deter India from seeking any conventional or nuclear offensive against Pakistan. And secondly, if it fails, the deterrence fails, then avoid India to win a nuclear war. Now, against this backdrop, the Indians have the policy of no first use of the nuclear policy. On the other hand, Pakistan has the policy of first use of nuclear weapons. So how do you see the two contradictory systems or statements between India and Pakistan?
Okay, first of all, India's so-called policy of no first use is a sham. It's not a credible policy. They have themselves introduced so many caveats, so many ifs and buts, that in such a situation we will use them, nuclear weapons, in such a situation we will. So it is not a reliable. In any case, for Pakistan from the very beginning, this Indian claim of no first use has never been any accepted norm or any accepted assurance. We have always assumed that if the Indians will, if it suits their purpose, they will use their nuclear weapons first. Now, again, number of Indians, the former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, their former Defense Minister, I forget his name, Rajnath Singh, I think his name was.
He is still
maybe he is still the Defense Minister.
Yes.
B.S. Nagal was the head of their nuclear forces, land forces. All of them have written or made statements that say that this is not a hard and fast commitment. We need to review this. depends on the situation. Mr. Vajpayee himself had said it, that if Pakistan thinks that we are not going to respond with nuclear weapons, and then we will show them how we will, after the attack on the Indian Parliament, and then the confrontation that started between India and Pakistan in the early 2001, 2002. He had made such a statement at that time. So the Indians themselves have questioned it. In any event, Pakistan has never believed in it. But there are countries that have announced a policy of no first use, like China has a policy of no first use. The Soviet Union had a policy of no first use of nuclear weapons.
But Americans never subscribed to no first use.
This is what I was going to say, that NATO had always rejected the Soviet no first use policy. The practice has been that countries that have an advantage in conventional weapons, in numbers, countries with higher number of conventional forces as compared to their opponent can afford to say that we will not be the first to use nuclear weapons, because it doesn't suit them to use nuclear weapons. They would like to keep, because of their conventional advantage, you keep the conflict conventional. It's the others who are numerically in a disadvantageous position, like Pakistan, who have the compulsion to go nuclear if they feel that their country is going, security is going to be compromised by a more powerful conventional opponent. That's why Pakistan against India, because of India has a, as we know, an advantage in numerical in numbers of conventional weapons. Their army is bigger, their air force is bigger, their navy is bigger than Pakistan. Therefore, keeping this disadvantage in mind, we have retained the option that if our security is under threat, we may be forced to use nuclear weapons to ensure our security. And I'll just to elaborate on this, after 1998 there was credible mutual assured destruction, deterrence based on mutual assured destruction between India and Pakistan. By 2004, the Indians had enunciated or started pursuing a strategy based on what they call cold start or proactive doctrine. That meant that the Indians were looking for an opportunity to use their conventional advantage to fight a conventional war below the nuclear threshold. So that was in order to respond to the cold start doctrine, Pakistan had to enunciate its full spectrum deterrence approach, which means that we can deter India at the operational level, at the tactical level, and at the strategic level, if necessary, by the first use of nuclear weapons.
But sir, that speaks also our lacking in our conventional weapon defense system.
That's true, because we have a smaller conventional force.
But so where do you think that, what are the Indian strengths with regard to strategic domain?
On the issue of cold start or
nuclear.
No, the Indians have, if you look at their Indian doctrine, it talks about so-called no first use, and then they talk about massive retaliation. If a country uses nuclear weapons, if say Pakistan were to use its nuclear weapons, the Indians say that the Indians claim that we will respond by massive retaliation.
So for the convenience of our viewers, would you kindly elaborate that when we talk about first use and second use, capability, second strike. So how we can elaborate on that, because our viewers are also students.
Okay.
Students of international politics, international relations, and they would want to understand that. And as subsequent, you can say, as a footnote, you think that Indo-US strategic partnership will last long, say if there is a showdown between China and America?
Okay, we'll come to that second part later. Let me just address your. Okay, so as I said right in the beginning, nuclear weapons are meant to deter wars, not fight them. That is the basic approach for which nuclear weapons are used, developed, and that is what they have managed to do so far. Okay? But when you come down to the actual possibility that deterrence does break down and nuclear weapons come into use, okay. So in that scenario, every nuclear weapon state pursues a policy of developing a second strike capability. What a second strike capability means is that a country has the capability to absorb a first strike by its opponent, which will destroy its nuclear weapons and destroy some parts of the country, but it will still retain enough nuclear weapons to respond on the opponent and be able to cause an unacceptable level of damage on the opponent. So that will deter the opponent to even consider a first use. So
Correct.
if you see what I'm saying is
Right.
that that ability to launch a second strike capability, ability to launch a credible second strike capability, actually deters the opponent from launching a first strike. So in other words, it strengthens deterrence in the first place.
Correct.
Okay, so that is what is meant by a second strike capability. Now, as far as the Indo-US relationship is concerned, the Indians have certainly taken full advantage of the American-China confrontation, in which they are aligned with the US as a strategic partner against China and a so-called net security provider. Americans are convinced that if in the case of a war between the US and China, India will go to war with China as well.
But there are also differing views.
I come to that. But from the Indian perspective, I am quite sure that India will not risk its own survival and existence by going to war with China for the sake of America. Okay. As you know, India has already been defeated by the Chinese in 1962, and they have never actually been able to get over this defeat. They don't want to risk another confrontation, clash with China. So I don't think that they will, even if the Americans ask them to, they will get engaged in a war with the Chinese.
Even this Galwan Valley.
Even a conventional war. Nuclear is a very different thing. But even a conventional war is something that the Indians will not want to get involved in. I have been a part of some track 2 dialogues with the Indians on these kind of strategic issues. and this question we have discussed, we have asked these questions from the Indians. What would you do? For instance, if the US and China go to war over Taiwan, they say that we will cross that bridge when we come to it. And then they add that that bridge will never come. So,
Right.
I am quite sure that they will not do that. And if the Americans believe that the Indians will come join them against China, I think they are being very stupid. It's not their unrealistic expectation.
Correct. I mean, and this is what one can expect, because even during the Galwan Valley episode, Indian reaction was quite subdued.
Yeah.
Not even at the diplomatic level. They didn't make much noise.
Yeah.
They tried to, keep it under the wraps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sir, my question is about the strategic balance of South Asia is obviously subject to instability due to India's behavior, increasing aggressive behavior towards Pakistan. Pakistan also faces the challenges of strategic environment, of India's advanced second strike potentials, growing second strike potential. So what options do you think are available to Pakistan as a response to the this second strike potential?
Okay, so I think we need to be very clear that the Indians and Pakistan are on a different strategic trajectory, because what I mean by that is that India has regional and global ambitions. It sees itself, it wants to become a regional power, global power. It has tried to project its power in the Indian Ocean. It wants to be in the Pacific, in the so-called, in the greater Pacific and Indian and Pacific Ocean region. So their ambitions are different. Our ambitions are that we do not seek the role of a regional power or a global power. Our objective is to ensure the security and territorial integrity of Pakistan against India. So for us, the requirements for second strike capability are different than for India. India's requirements in their own perception is that they need a blue water navy, they need an aircraft carriers, they need nuclear powered submarines that can go deep into the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and they need bases here and there and there. Our objective is to protect our own environment and our territorial waters and our exclusive economic zone in the Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf. This is our objective in terms. And our second strike capability, the Indian second strike capability is based on their naval, in their nuclear powered submarines, on their other long range missiles and all these things. Our second strike capability is based on our smaller range but effective nuclear powered diesel powered submarines, which have a shorter range of operation, but that is suitable for our needs because we do not want to project power deep into the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean. As I said, we need to protect our interests in the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. That's our objective.
So I think it's a game of capabilities. We, in fact, could build our capability to restore the deterrence in the region. But now Americans are quite anxious to get India in the NSG, Nuclear Supply Group. It's the Chinese which are in fact raising the objection that you have to have a level playing field. But the issue is India is enhancing its capability.
Look,
Where do we stand?
my argument in response to the earlier question and to your question also is the same. We have the capability to protect our security interests, both through our nuclear and our conventional weapon systems. Against India, as I said, we do not seek to become a global power or a regional power. So, in terms of protecting our own interests, we are capable of doing that despite India's own capabilities. Now, we have talked about the range of missiles. That's one issue through which we will need to develop those capabilities going forward. We will need to develop our abilities to be able to penetrate in India's ballistic missile defense, which we already have that capability through the cruise missile and the MIRV missiles. We already have that kind of capability. But in the future, as you say, the developments that are taking place, we will need to keep up our own ability to match those developments and meet those requirements. As far as the NSG is concerned, your question of India's membership of NSG, as long as the Indians and the Chinese are on opposing sides, and they are likely to be on opposing sides for as long as I can foresee.
Also on MTCR.
MTCR as well. The Chinese will not agree to the Indians joining the NSG. MTCR, the Indians have already joined, and it is the other way around, that it's the Indians and the Americans that are keeping the Chinese out of the MTCR. Well, that's another question. But the more important thing here is the nuclear suppliers group. However, and this is I think a point that needs to be made for a lot of your viewers who have not understood. The NSG is an organization that engages in civilian nuclear cooperation. And even though India is not a member of the NSG, the waiver, the one-time waiver that was given to India because of American efforts by the NSG allows India to engage in nuclear commerce in the civilian nuclear side with other countries. So, India is enjoying the benefits of what you would get to be in the, if you were
That
in the
includes
NSG.
the fuel also?
That includes the fuel, it includes other equipment as well. However, and this is something that needs to be cleared here, because we are not at a disadvantage, even though we are not a member of the NSG, but we do have, and the credit goes to our diplomats, we do have an agreement with the Chinese, which is called the so-called grandfather clause, according to which the Chinese are committed to help us develop our civilian nuclear capabilities, even though we are not a member of the NSG. Okay? And these include Canop 2 and 3.
Correct.
These include the Chashma 4 and 5, and if
But the main issue is, because if India gets this leverage in a sense that if they have the access to civilian nuclear technology as well as fuel cycles, so they can then spare their own fuel for dedicated purposes.
they are doing that already.
They are doing that
Already, yes.
So that's the disadvantage.
Well, disadvantage in a way that you can say that their nuclear arsenal can become much bigger, but let me assure you that the difference between Pakistan's nuclear arsenal and the Indian nuclear arsenal is not very big.
Correct. Thank you so much, sir. I think, Amjad, if you...
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Ambassador Zamir Akram. I don't have to say much. In conclusion, I can only say that deterrence is working between Pakistan and India. And I think any attempt by India to go for misadventure would be very costly. And I think let's hope that the good sense would prevail, sanity would prevail, and the two countries would try to live together and try to address their core issues in a diplomatic manner, in a peaceful manner. With this hope, keep on watching our program and give us your advice as well as your views, how we can improve it further. Thank you so much.